You know, I used to have a bit of an image issue. I really did. I was somebody who wanted to be noticed, who wanted to be great. The problem was, in middle school and high school, I wasn't so much one who was noticed and who was considered great among my peers. I was someone who, at one point in my life, I was ostracized. I was picked on. I was bullied. But I wanted to be great, and it made me very sad that these things would happen. And to top it all off, the girls weren't into me that much as well. They just weren't. You pass the note, you ask them point blank, and there was oh, it's not you, it's me. Or no, I just got out of a relationship. The list of excuses I could come up with. Why girls would not go to a dance with me or would not go out to eat with me or things like that. It was very trying. And I would think to myself, if only I could be more like Brad Pitt or George Clooney. And I would stand and I would suck in my gut. And I would flex my muscles, because I don't have the kind of definition where they're flexed naturally. I'd have to flex them, and I'd think, if I could only walk around like this, maybe I will be more impressive to people. At least for 10 seconds until I have to breathe. So I had an image problem. We tend to struggle with all kinds of image problems like the ones that Jesus confronts in the Pharisees in chapter 23. Now mine was a need and a desire to be accepted by someone, anyone. And of course, through God's provision, I had friends who accepted me as I was. As I mentioned several weeks ago, I outkicked my coverage and married Katie. Married very much up the scale. So I found God's provision, but I also came to the realization that seeking to be great in those ways, seeking to be known as popular or famous, seeking as I used to be a professional athlete, which soon became evident to everyone that wasn't going to happen. All these pursuits that I had, even the temptation to pursue riches so that everyone might see me as this great and wonderful, honorable person, began to pale in comparison to the kind of honor that's offered through Jesus Christ. Now, we've been talking for the last few weeks about the village of God, and we continue that discussion today. The village of God, the first week, we focused on gifts. Both financial gifts, but also our personal gifts, our personal time, and our talents, and our treasures. And about how, while Jesus was asked the question, should they pay the tax? And he answered, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God's what is God's, was actually a subtle way of reminding everyone in the context of the Maccabean revolt and success of that revolt that all is God's. That all we have, that all we are, is to be offered to God. And that we do that we pursue that not because we feel guilty, not because we are made to feel convicted that we should give, but because as we seek to discipline ourselves in the faith, we become people of conviction, for who the love of God has been so evident that we long to give. And that we seek to discipline ourselves daily, more and more, to give not only to God, and certainly not only to our local church, but to our neighbor as well. And that in giving those gifts that we bring to our local church as we think about our church life is also buttressed by an act of accountability in which we dialogue as a community about how we use the resources that come into this local congregation to impact our community. So that if we're using all of our money simply for maintenance, maybe we need to be discussing how we as a church are being stewards as well. Because this isn't about building a church that is great, it's about building a movement that reveals God's love and God's provision to this world. And then the second week, last week, we talked about the two great commandments, love God, love neighbor, and about how Jesus was both David's son, but yet David's Lord as well, and how this called us to kind of a countercultural movement of love and peace and justice that reveals to the world that there's a whole other way of being, that bears witness to who God is calling us in this world to be and who God created us to be in the first place. And so this week, we encounter Matthew 23, in which Jesus flat out excoriates, just lambasts the Pharisees to his followers, pulls no punches, uses language and rhetoric that was actually very common for its day. To call your opponent blind and foolish and all these things were common things. Not unlike some of the unfortunate political language that we see in our place and time today, where we seek to denigrate our opponents rather than finding what's in common. But the thing is Jesus was confronting those who were seeking power, who were seeking notoriety, who were seeking to be considered among the honorable. And it all fit in within the social framework of honor and shame. And you either reached the point where you were considered among the honorable in society, or you were considered among the shamed. And the Pharisees, at least the class of Pharisees that Jesus is addressing here in the Gospel of according to Matthew, had very much interpreted the law and had structured it in such a way to draw attention to themselves and to bring themselves honor in other people's eyes, while making it very hard for others to enter into their community, to enter into their fellowship. It became a very exclusive way of observing the God-given law. Jesus is calling them to terms to this, for they had interpreted in such a way as to not serve the welfare of all the people, but to serve their own desires, to make them the few honorable, and make it very hard for anyone else to crawl out of the shamed into their place of honor. And this, in the first century, had significant consequences because it affected who you could marry, it affected what role in society you could have, it affected so many of your choices. And so by confronting this, Jesus is calling his disciples to not be like them, but to open up an inclusive community. Why does he call them to be servants? Because while the Pharisees were seeking to be great, were seeking to be rulers, were seeking to draw the line in the sand for the day of the standard that everyone should obtain, and seeking in that way to make themselves appear great, Jesus calls us to be servants so that we are speaking to the shamed and letting them know that while the rest of this world may not consider you honorable, the God of all creation, the God revealed in Jesus Christ, holds you as dear, considers you to hold great honor. And so we go forth, not in our faith to be great and to be among the honorable, but to bestow honor upon all our neighbors. And by that, we follow in discipleship and in stewardship by going out in service, as stated in our vows when we joined the United Methodist Church, to serve all of our neighbors, not just those to whom there may be some benefit if we reach out to, but to those for whom there may be nothing to offer in return except their own presence. Knowing that those who are among the ostracized, those who are wrecked in poverty, those who have a very hard time finding a place to fit in, are those who have not the only place in God's heart, but a very special place in God's heart. Because this world does continue to draw lines between us, whether it's based on political affiliations or whether it's based on income, whether it's based on color of skin or our nation of origin. We draw lines in the sand. But God's universal love calls us to be the servants to all, to offer God's love and grace to everyone. By doing so, we take part in the stewardship that we are called to through Jesus Christ, That Jesus Christ, who came down as God in the flesh, took on human form, fully human yet fully divine. God came down and offered up all that God is to help us know that we have honor, to help us know that we are offered the salvation that comes through understanding that God offers all of us forgiveness and the empowerment by the Spirit to have sin overcome in our lives so that we can follow in love. So we seek to follow today as the village of God. You may see the fun subtitle, Who Are We as Village People? We're not construction work. Well, some of us are construction workers and policemen and the like. But we don't dress up in silly costumes and dance around as village people. We go out as who we are, as the servants, in many ways as those first responders of faith who step out to the hurting, step out to those who are trapped in lives of destruction, and to share with them the great honor that God bestows on them. The same honor that was bestowed on Peter when Peter threw himself at Jesus' feet and said, "Leave me, for I'm a sinful man." And Jesus said, "Be not afraid. You were not shamed in God's eyes." When he stood between the judge, juries, and executioners and the adulterous woman, and he told them, "Whoever is without sin may cast the first stone." And when they left, he asked, "Who here condemns you?" And Jesus said, "Neither do I." You have honor in God's eyes. So we can go out from here today as we seek to devote the fullness of our lives to God in stewardship, and understand that God bestows honor upon us through Christ and bestows honor on all through Christ. And remembering that we, whether believer or non in this world, are all created in the image of God, that we all had the breath of God breathed into us, and we all are dear to our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. So, as we mentioned earlier, or as was implied earlier in the first part of our communion liturgy, this is an open table we observe because we believe in God's universal love for all, that salvation is offered to all, and that grace can be received by all, not just in the elements of communion, but in a very special way in the elements of communion. That God's presence is here with us today when we gather together, when we partake of communion. And we all partake of the one loaf because God offers this love to all of us equally, bestowing honor to each and every one of us and calling us to follow in discipleship and in stewardship. And as he explained to the Pharisees, in faith, in peace, in justice. In the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Spirit. Amen.